Prelude. It is an undeniable fact that the past decades have brought a dramatic increase in racially motivated conflict in the United States, as well as around the world. As you continue to read this reintroduction to the true history of the race doctrine, what should become glaringly obvious is that we are witnessing a repeat of history. People being lulled into feelings of self-hatred and guilt based upon skin color. The media propaganda we are hearing today are reminiscent of the results of the Clark-Doll test of the 1950s, a social study which revealed that Jim Crow laws were psychologically damaging, causing young African American children to believe that the color of their skin inherently made them bad people. We are eyewitnesses to a repeat of history, with an unprecedented reversal. European Americans are now being labeled as bad based solely upon the color of their skin. Skin phobia is alive and well. Philosopher George Santayana once said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The new humans of Generation X and the millennials are scarcely aware that they are living through a glitch in the matrix. A checkered past they are too young to know, and the old have long forgotten. The delusions of white superiority and black inferiority, woven into the fabric of our society ages ago, has returned yet again to haunt another unsuspecting generation. The demons of our forgotten history hold us hostage, separating us from the peace we could otherwise enjoy. The purpose of this book is simple: to present you the truth. I have been an eyewitness to the scarlet history of the ever-changing racialized storyline for the past 55 years, but the old gray matter is still sharp. I'm old enough to remember, yet still young enough to recall. I grew up in both the Jim Crow and the post-Jim Crow era. For the past 20 years, I've used my skills, developed from being a former New York City police investigator, as well as an avid lover of history, to locate the smoking gun. I have performed a thorough, unbiased private investigation, sifting through mounds of documents and historic records with the goal of untangling the tangled web. I'm here for the sole purpose of exposing the facts of the matter and providing an answer to those wondering what really happened. While nothing can change the past and erase the pain caused by years of injustice, the truth does have a way of bringing solace to the troubled mind. Does skin color, one shade or another, automatically make a person a bad seed? Were our forebears inherently evil, or were they brainwashed to behave in an evil manner? The answer to this question, based upon my 20-year investigation, is the latter. It was the cleverly crafted Jim Crow laws, used specifically for the purpose of mind control, not human inclination, as we are being led to believe by the latest propaganda. Jim Crow laws is actually the culprit behind the racial saga, guilty of inspiring a hypnotic, trance-like hatred between two perceived racial groups. The United States is a country with a history of normalized peculiar rules, predicated upon something we were all born with: skin color. During the Crow era, the masses were brainwashed into hating each other. Yes, under the penalty of imprisonment, as well as the penalty of death, you could be killed on the spot for looking into a person's eyes. Reckless eyeballing was used successfully in the 14th century manual called Malus Maleficarum, Hammer against Women. The same mind control techniques used to bring women under control back in the 14th century was intentionally resurrected to be used again in the Jim Crow era. Skin color and loyalty to an imaginary caste system was used as a social monitoring tool. It determined your role in society, as well as your status. In many regions, the only person worse than a person of color was one who sympathized with them. Human beings, those branded as white, were lynched to death in front of crowds, used as an example. This was the psychological message sent to anyone who was even thinking about breaking the rules. This is what happens to those guilty of the simple action of sympathizing with those deemed to be the enemy of society, those surnamed Negroes. Cavorting, aiding, and abetting in any manner was looked upon as seditious. The term nigger lover is called to mind. The destructive damage to the human psyche caused by the race doctrine has left a stain upon the mass consciousness, in such a way that people living today have been classically conditioned with a knee-jerk, triggered reaction to skin tone, one of which, in many cases, they are not consciously aware of. Liberating oneself from the shackles of race-based consciousness has a much-needed healing effect, paving the way for closure, reconciliation, and forgiveness. Understanding the causal relationship between race and racism itself is the key. When referring to the term race throughout this book, it signifies the classification of human beings, domesticated like a breed of animal, into distinct and separate groups. As you will soon see, this age-old accepted social engineering practice of the past is within itself the factor which has greatly influenced the continuation of conflict in our present reality. I have often sat to ponder what a world free of race clarification would look like. Insightful conversations with countless people who identify as either black or white. I have been a fly on the wall through over 10,000 interviews. The thoughts conveyed through these encounters have revealed to me a self-image of individuals inextricably connected to a race. Many of them could not identify with themselves apart from their identity as either black or white. Diving deeper, these conversations were marked with confessions of deeply rooted emotional scars resulting in feelings of jealousy, inferiority, guilt, and low self-esteem. These feelings stemmed from their subliminal acceptance of racial identity. I was deeply moved and taken aback by the strong sentiments these folks shared regarding their own self-image as it related to racial identity. Reflecting later on these conversations, it became quite clear that the individuals struggling with their own identity were equally oblivious to the fact that the belief system driving these feelings of inferiority and low self-esteem had no scientific or biological basis. God created human beings with no racial identity, and man turned the natural order around, converting those unsuspecting humans into something unnatural, races judged not by merit but by the color of their skin. The stories we were told about race were stories made up by powerful men with a political and social agenda. For certain, the common man was not one to proselytize such a doctrine. Surely this is fairly obvious from a historical perspective. The fact is that up until the past 150 years, less than 20% of the population could even read or write. I grew up with people who had never learned to read or write. It's reasonable to conclude poor people who could not read or write did not create the rules. All they could do is blindly follow them. The dark energies that constructed the evil race doctrine were the wealthy influencers, those with lofty ambitions and the motive and opportunity to bring them to fruition. Kings and their wise men, magicians, masters of the dark art of deception, skilled at hiding behind the Bible and twisting its words. The story of Noah and the curse of Ham is one such example. Ham is noted as the one who stumbled upon his father Noah, drunk and naked in his own tent. Upon seeing this, he tells his brothers, Shem and Japheth, who proceed to help cover up their father without gazing in his direction. Ham, however, does not avert his eyes, and he sees his father's nakedness in full. When Noah finds out what his son has seen, he fatefully curses Ham's offspring. Noah dictates Ham's offspring as destined to be a servant of servants. In other words, a slave of a slave. From its earliest inception, the curse of Ham has been used as the justification for segregation and slavery. The few people back then who could read were taught to read from the Bible. The foundation of religion made it fairly simple to indoctrinate a person. Inferring that Ham was a person of color during Sunday service would be accepted as gospel and never questioned, in spite of the fact that at no point was color or race explicitly mentioned in the Bible story. The period in which the Bible was written predates the idea of a racial classification system, or even the etymology of the word race for that matter. While our ancient ancestors no doubt noticed differences in our skin colors, they had no clear doctrine of race, not to be confused with culture, from the Latin word coulere. Coulere, which alludes to the place and manner in which human personalities develop socially. However, there is no scientific, biological basis for the social classification we call race. The first formal doctrine of race was published in 1449. Juan II, King of Castile, Spain, seeking to separate those deemed to have pure blood from those of Moorish and darker-skinned ancestry. The Spanish categorization and treatment of Jewish and African people was the Jim Crow of its day. This decree provided the seedbed for Christian negrophobic racism. This decree gave rise to concern over purity of blood, limpieza de sangre in Spanish, a doctrine that was to be understood literally, not metaphorically. Medical beliefs of the time held that blood was the principal of 4 humors in the body, because it circulated the other. Blood, therefore, played an essential role in establishing a person's character. Impure blood, or mixing with a less favorable bloodline, was believed to taint a person's character. In 1604, historian Fray Prudencio de Sandoval compared the impure natures of those called blacks and Jews, aptly stated, "Who can deny that in descendants of Jews there persists and endures the evil inclination of their ancient ingratitude and lack of understanding, just as in the Negroes there persists the inseparability between them and their blackness. This was the law of the land. The king said it, and this is the way it has to be." Most people of that time period had no interest in being beheaded, and so people grew used to living segregated. Because this was the social protocol that best fit the king's desires, this was not the ideology of the common people, those of whom they called peasants. Slavery and caste proved to be the right foundation for what was to follow, a rich man, poor man society. As wealthy businessmen of Spain and Portugal entered into the lucrative slave trade, a wealthy business of buying, selling, and trading human lives, formerly dominated by pirates at the Barbary coast of Africa. The North African states held a long history of slavery, and they had been enslaving their fellow citizens as well as Europeans for hundreds of years. Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli once made up the notorious Barbary coast. Opportunist European businessmen, seeing how the game of empire building was played, decided it was Spain and Portugal's turn to join the lucrative slave market. The Mediterranean seas were once ruled by Barbary pirates, from 711 CE to 820 CE. These ancestors of the Moors made Europeans as far as Iceland and Ireland cower with fear as they violently seized merchant ships and ruthlessly kidnapped Europeans to satisfy the demand for alabaster-skinned women in North African slave markets. This triad trickled down to coastal towns, causing residents to abandon their homes and belongings in exchange for inland safety. These turbulent relations paint a picture of conflict and mistrust. The bilateral enslavement exposes history in a way that is infrequently investigated. While North Africans invented slavery, Europeans, who also had been enslaving each other for hundreds of years — Italy was the breadbasket of Rome — certainly took it to another level. Mansa Musa, the emperor of the African state of Mali, was the richest person ever to live, with a net worth of over $400 billion. His great wealth, attained by conquering and enslaving other humans, attracted the attention of the European elite. When Mansa Musa went on a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 CE, his journey through Egypt caused quite a stir. The kingdom of Mali was relatively unknown outside of West Africa until this event. Arab writers from the time said that he traveled with an entourage of tens of thousands of people and dozens of camels, each carrying 136 kilograms or 300 pounds of gold. While in Cairo, Mansa Musa met with the Sultan of Egypt, and his caravan spent and gave away so much gold that the overall value of gold decreased in Egypt for the next 12 years. Stories of his fabulous wealth even reached Europe. The Catalan Atlas, an information map which could be considered the internet of its day, created in 1375 CE by Spanish cartographers, shows West Africa dominated by a depiction of Mansa Musa sitting on the throne, holding a nugget of gold in one hand and a golden staff in the other. After the publication of this atlas, Mansa Musa became cemented in the global imagination as a figure of stupendous wealth, which he funneled to the Barbary Coast pirates, who in turn used this funding to enslave Europeans, who in turn responded by enslaving Africans. The rest is history. Without accepting the facts, namely that while Europeans enslaved Africans, Africans also enslaved Europeans, we cannot begin to understand U.S. policy regarding African Americans down to this day. Jim Crow laws and covenants of the late 1800s, forbidding the ownership of land by any descendants of Moorish background, as well as the host of massacres and crusades designed to keep people of color in their place. These actions were a direct response to events we have never until now been told occurred and never permitted to heal from. The correlation between the past and the present cannot be ignored. The dark energies of the race doctrine have never been used in connection with anything good. Nothing about the race doctrine, past or present, inspires a warm, fuzzy feeling. Nothing about identifying oneself as either black or white tells another person anything good about you, except suspicions. Suspicions we, up until this late date, have yet to overcome. The ultimate goal of this book is to expose the mythological teachings of race as the clever mind-control tool it is proven to be. These misinterpretations and classifications are the cause of many evils we face today.